The cameras hadn't even finished rolling before the whispers started. Something had gone terribly wrong, and this time, it wasn't just reality TV theatrics. Fans are shocked after reports surfaced that Kirk Frost allegedly drew a hard line in the sand, pointing the finger directly at his longtime partner and wife, Rasheeda, for what insiders are calling a major business crisis that could shatter everything they've built. Emotions ran high behind closed doors as raised voices echoed through offices that once symbolized power, loyalty, and shared success. Now, those same walls are said to be filled with blame, betrayal, and a sentence that left everyone stunned: "I can't partner with you anymore." According to sources close to the situation, this wasn't a sudden blow-up, it was a slow-burning fuse lit by financial pressure, bruised egos, and secrets that refused to stay buried. Friends say Kirk felt cornered, convinced that a single decision spiraled into chaos, while Rasheeda stood her ground, allegedly blindsided by the accusation and furious that her name was being dragged through the mud. Fans are shocked as social media erupted with theories, choosing sides before either party had a chance to speak. Emotions ran high as family members were pulled into the crossfire, and the family was left divided over who really crossed the line. What started as a power couple's business empire now teeters on the edge of collapse. Was this a calculated betrayal, or a desperate attempt to shift blame? And if Kirk is truly done partnering with Rasheeda, what does that mean for their marriage, their brand, and their future? Buckle up, because the drama you're about to hear goes deeper, darker, and messier than anyone ever imagined. The room felt heavy before anyone even spoke, like the air itself knew a storm was coming. Kirk sat at the long conference table, fingers tapping in a rhythm that gave away his frustration, while Rasheeda stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the city they once celebrated conquering together. What was supposed to be a routine meeting about numbers and timelines had already turned into something far more personal. You could hear it in Kirk's breathing, sharp and impatient, like he'd been holding back for weeks and was finally done pretending everything was fine. He broke the silence with a laugh that didn't carry any humor. He said he was tired of fixing messes, tired of being the one blamed when things went left, and most of all tired of feeling like the business was slipping out of his control. Rasheeda turned slowly, disbelief written all over her face. She asked him what he was even talking about, because from where she stood, she'd been the one holding everything together while he played defense with outsiders and critics. Emotions ran high as Kirk leaned back in his chair and said the words that changed everything: that one decision she made without him had triggered a chain reaction they might not recover from. Rasheeda's voice shook as she fired back, saying she'd made that call to protect them, not hurt them. She reminded him of the late nights, the sacrifices, the times she put her own reputation on the line to keep their brand alive. Fans would later be shocked to hear that this argument wasn't about love, or even loyalty, but about money, power, and trust. Kirk accused her of pushing forward with a partnership he warned her about, claiming the fallout had already scared off investors and put their shared empire under a microscope. Rasheeda shot back that Kirk had gone silent when she needed guidance, leaving her to make impossible choices alone. The tension only escalated when Kirk stood up, pacing the room, saying he felt blindsided. He said the calls from lawyers, the worried messages from business associates, and the rumors swirling online all traced back to that one move. Rasheeda clenched her jaw, tears forming but refusing to fall, and told him it was unfair to rewrite history now that things were messy. She said he'd signed off on the vision, if not the details, and that he couldn't suddenly act like a victim when pressure hit. The family was left divided as word of this confrontation spread, with some insiders quietly siding with Kirk's concerns while others felt Rasheeda was being scapegoated. Outside the room, whispers traveled fast. Staff members exchanged looks, knowing they were witnessing the unraveling of something once untouchable. A close friend later claimed the argument could be heard down the hall, with Kirk's voice rising as he said he couldn't keep putting his name on something he didn't trust anymore. Rasheeda reportedly snapped back that trust was built through support, not threats. She reminded him that every successful move they ever made came from standing united, not turning on each other the moment things got hard. As the argument stretched on, Kirk dropped another bomb. He said he'd already been advised to step back, to separate himself before the situation got worse. Rasheeda froze, asking him what he meant by that. When he said he was considering ending their business partnership entirely, the room went quiet. Fans are shocked knowing that this wasn't just talk, but a real possibility that could change everything. Rasheeda whispered that he couldn't be serious, that walking away would damage not just the business but their family. Kirk responded that the damage was already done, and staying might destroy them both. The conversation turned darker when past issues were dragged into the light. Kirk hinted that this wasn't the first time he felt ignored, that there had been moments before where he swallowed his concerns to keep peace. Rasheeda fired back that he couldn't keep using old wounds to justify new accusations. Emotions ran high as both of them questioned whether they'd ever truly been on the same page, or if success had only masked deeper cracks. The pain in Rasheeda's voice cut through the anger when she asked him if he really believed she'd risk everything they built for one bad move. As night fell, neither of them backed down. Kirk's final words in that meeting hung in the air like a threat and a confession all at once. He said he couldn't partner with her anymore if this was how decisions were going to be made. Rasheeda stared at him, stunned, realizing this wasn't just a heated argument but the beginning of a much bigger fight. The family was left divided, the future uncertain, and the once solid foundation of their empire suddenly felt fragile. What happened in that room would ripple outward, pulling in loved ones, fans, and critics alike, setting the stage for a fallout no one saw coming. The fallout from that night didn't stay locked behind closed doors for long. By the next morning, the tension had followed them home, creeping into every quiet moment and unfinished sentence. Rasheeda barely slept, replaying Kirk's words over and over in her head, wondering how a business disagreement had turned into a threat that felt personal. Kirk, on the other hand, woke up convinced he'd finally said what he'd been holding in for too long. To him, the silence between them wasn't peace, it was avoidance, and now everything was on the table whether they were ready or not. When family members started calling, it became clear that the argument had already grown legs. Fans are shocked at how quickly opinions formed, with some believing Kirk was protecting his legacy while others accused him of throwing Rasheeda under the bus. Rasheeda's mother reportedly urged her to stay calm, reminding her that public perception could make or break the situation. Kirk's inner circle wasn't as gentle, pushing him to draw firm boundaries before the business crisis spiraled further. The family was left divided, each side convinced they were acting in her or his best interest. The next face-to-face confrontation happened at home, far from the polished offices and watchful staff. The energy was raw, stripped of corporate language and replaced with years of shared history. Rasheeda asked Kirk how he could talk about separation so casually, as if they hadn't built everything side by side. Kirk responded that this was exactly the problem, that lines between marriage and business had blurred so badly he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Emotions ran high as Rasheeda accused him of trying to rewrite their story to make himself look like the hero. Kirk shot back that he didn't want to be a hero, he wanted stability. He claimed the backlash from that partnership decision was already costing them deals, and that people he trusted were warning him to protect himself. Rasheeda laughed bitterly, saying those same people had never believed in her vision from the start. She reminded him that every bold move she made was met with skepticism until it succeeded. Fans would later be shocked to hear her say that if he truly believed she was reckless, then maybe he'd never truly respected her as a businesswoman. As days passed, the argument took on new layers. Lawyers were mentioned, not as a threat at first, but as a precaution. That alone sent chills through their circle. Friends tried to mediate, suggesting cooling-off periods and joint statements, but neither Kirk nor Rasheeda was ready to back down. The business crisis became less about numbers and more about trust, about who felt heard and who felt betrayed. The family was left divided as even small gatherings turned tense, with conversations abruptly stopping when either of them entered the room. Then came the leak. An unnamed source allegedly shared details of their dispute, framing Rasheeda as the sole decision-maker behind the controversial move. Fans are shocked at how fast the narrative spread. Rasheeda was furious, convinced someone close to Kirk had fed the story. Kirk denied it, saying the truth was bound to come out anyway. Emotions ran high as Rasheeda accused him of letting her take the fall while he stayed silent. She said his silence felt louder than any accusation. The pressure pushed Kirk to a breaking point. During another heated exchange, he admitted that he felt disrespected, not just ignored. He claimed he'd warned her repeatedly about rushing into partnerships without airtight protection. Rasheeda snapped back that warnings without solutions were useless. She said she stepped up because someone had to, and that she refused to apologize for trying to move forward when he hesitated. The words cut deep, exposing insecurities neither had voiced before. As the argument stretched into weeks, the business suffered. Meetings were postponed, decisions stalled, and staff morale dropped. Fans are shocked at how visible the cracks became, with subtle changes noticed in public appearances and social media posts. Rasheeda appeared more guarded, Kirk more distant. Insiders whispered that separation wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was being planned. The family was left divided as everyone braced for what might come next. The turning point came during a late-night discussion that started calm but quickly unraveled. Kirk confessed that he felt blamed for everything that went wrong, even when he tried to step back. Rasheeda broke down, saying she felt abandoned, forced to carry the weight alone and then punished for it. Emotions ran high as both admitted they were exhausted, not just by the crisis but by years of unresolved tension. For a moment, it seemed like understanding was within reach. But then Kirk said it again, quieter this time, that he couldn't continue like this. He said partnering with her now felt like standing on unstable ground, always waiting for the next collapse. Rasheeda stared at him, realization settling in that this wasn't about one decision anymore. This was about fear, control, and a future neither of them could clearly see. The family was left divided as word spread that a formal separation of their business interests was being discussed seriously. By the end of that night, nothing was resolved. Instead, lines were drawn deeper than ever. Kirk retreated into strategy mode, consulting advisors and mapping out exits. Rasheeda leaned into her support system, determined not to let the narrative define her. Fans are shocked watching the slow-motion unraveling of a partnership they once admired. What started as a business crisis had become a personal reckoning, and everyone could feel that the most explosive moments were still ahead. The tension reached a boiling point when a critical meeting was scheduled with key stakeholders, the kind of meeting that could either calm the storm or turn it into a full-blown disaster. Rasheeda walked in prepared, armed with documents, projections, and a calm she had practiced all morning. Kirk arrived late, eyes tired, jaw tight, already defensive. The moment they sat across from each other, everyone in the room could feel it. Fans are shocked hearing how what was meant to be a show of unity quickly became another battlefield. Rasheeda opened with confidence, explaining the strategy behind the controversial partnership and how the long-term gains outweighed the short-term backlash. She spoke clearly, passionately, reminding everyone that risk had always been part of their success story. Kirk listened, but when it was his turn, his tone shifted the energy instantly. He said the numbers didn't reflect the reality on the ground, that trust had been shaken, and that reputational damage couldn't be measured on a spreadsheet. Emotions ran high as the room fell silent, realizing this wasn't just a disagreement, it was a public fracture. One investor asked the question everyone was thinking, whether Kirk and Rasheeda were still aligned. The pause before either answered felt endless. Rasheeda finally said yes, that they were committed to finding a solution together. Kirk hesitated, then said he was committed to protecting the business, whatever that required. That moment alone sent shockwaves. Fans are shocked knowing insiders later described that pause as the exact second confidence in their partnership cracked beyond repair. After the meeting, Rasheeda confronted Kirk in the hallway, anger replacing the restraint she'd held inside. She accused him of undermining her in front of people whose support they needed. Kirk fired back that he refused to lie to save face. He said pretending everything was fine would only make things worse. The family was left divided as word of the tense exchange spread, with some praising Kirk's honesty and others calling it a calculated move to distance himself. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded with clips, quotes, and speculation. Fans are shocked at how quickly public opinion turned brutal. Rasheeda was labeled reckless by some, a visionary by others. Kirk was painted as either a realist or a traitor, depending on who you asked. Emotions ran high as both were forced to confront not just each other, but millions of voices weighing in on their private struggle. Behind the scenes, the pressure intensified. Rasheeda received calls from partners questioning her authority. Kirk was approached with offers to continue independently. The temptation was real. Kirk admitted to a close friend that the idea of starting fresh felt like relief. Rasheeda, meanwhile, doubled down, determined to prove she could steer the ship even if he walked away. The family was left divided as these possibilities became more than rumors. Another explosive argument followed, this time sparked by paperwork. Rasheeda discovered documents suggesting Kirk had begun preliminary steps to separate assets. When she confronted him, his silence spoke volumes. Emotions ran high as she demanded to know how long he'd been planning his exit. Kirk responded that planning wasn't the same as deciding, but that he had to be ready for all outcomes. Rasheeda accused him of already checking out emotionally, of preparing to leave her holding the blame. The fight escalated, dragging old wounds back into the light. Kirk brought up past moments where he felt ignored, times he felt decisions were made without him. Rasheeda countered with memories of standing by him through controversies, defending him when walking away would have been easier. Fans are shocked hearing how deeply personal the arguments became, cutting far beyond business strategy into questions of loyalty and respect. Days later, a family gathering turned tense when relatives began taking sides openly. One member suggested compromise, another said separation might be the healthiest option. Rasheeda felt ganged up on, while Kirk felt validated. The family was left divided, the once tight-knit support system now fractured by opinions and fear of what was coming next. Emotions ran high as Rasheeda walked out early, unable to listen to advice that felt like judgment. The strain began to show physically. Rasheeda appeared drained, Kirk increasingly withdrawn. Insiders claimed communication between them was now limited to formal updates. Fans are shocked noticing the distance, the lack of shared appearances, the subtle shifts that spoke louder than any statement. The business crisis had officially become a public spectacle, whether they wanted it or not. The breaking point came when Rasheeda made a bold move. Without consulting Kirk, she announced a temporary restructuring aimed at stabilizing operations. To her, it was necessary, a way to prove leadership in chaos. To Kirk, it was confirmation of his worst fears. Emotions ran high when he confronted her, saying she'd just proven his point about unilateral decisions. Rasheeda snapped back that leadership meant acting when others hesitated. That confrontation ended with Kirk saying he was done trying to catch up to decisions he didn't make. He said if she wanted to lead alone, then she should. The words hit hard, final in a way nothing else had been. Rasheeda stood frozen, realizing the gap between them had widened into something almost impossible to cross. The family was left divided as the reality set in that reconciliation was slipping further away. In the aftermath, both retreated into their corners. Kirk leaned fully into the idea of separation, consulting advisors and mapping timelines. Rasheeda focused on damage control, determined to salvage both the business and her reputation. Fans are shocked watching the slow unraveling, wondering if this was the end of an era or just the calm before an even bigger storm. By the time rumors surfaced that formal announcements were being drafted, neither denied it. Silence became their loudest statement. Emotions ran high as everyone waited for the next move, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The crisis had evolved into a showdown, and with so much at stake, the question wasn't whether something would break, but who would be left standing when it did. The silence between them became unbearable, thick with everything that had been left unsaid. Days turned into weeks, and what once felt like a temporary crisis now felt like a permanent fracture. Rasheeda tried to focus on forward momentum, holding meetings, reassuring staff, and presenting confidence even when doubt crept in late at night. Kirk, meanwhile, moved quietly, strategically, making calls that felt colder and more calculated than anything he'd done before. Fans are shocked at how quickly the situation shifted from emotional chaos to what looked like a chess match with real lives on the line. The tension exploded again when Rasheeda learned that Kirk had met privately with a longtime advisor without informing her. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said he needed independent counsel, someone who could look at the situation without emotion. Rasheeda's voice cracked as she asked if she was now considered the enemy. Emotions ran high as Kirk replied that this was exactly the problem, that everything became personal the moment business decisions were questioned. Rasheeda fired back that their entire success had been built on trust, and now he was treating her like a liability. Word of the private meeting leaked almost immediately. Fans are shocked at how fast speculation spiraled, with rumors suggesting Kirk was preparing to announce a full split. Rasheeda felt blindsided, not just by the meeting, but by how exposed she suddenly felt. She accused Kirk of letting the narrative run wild while she took the hits. Kirk responded that he couldn't control what people assumed, and that constantly reacting to rumors was part of what got them into this mess in the first place. Another argument followed, this time over messaging. Rasheeda wanted to release a joint statement addressing the crisis head-on. Kirk refused, saying any statement that implied unity would be dishonest. Emotions ran high as Rasheeda accused him of sabotaging her efforts to stabilize things. Kirk said stability couldn't be built on pretending they were still aligned when they weren't. The family was left divided as even close friends disagreed on whether transparency or silence was the smarter move. The stress began affecting everyone around them. Staff members whispered about job security. Collaborators hesitated to commit. Fans are shocked at how a once solid brand now felt unpredictable. Rasheeda took the criticism personally, feeling like every doubt reflected on her leadership. Kirk, on the other hand, seemed increasingly detached, focused on minimizing fallout rather than repairing relationships. The emotional distance between them grew wider with every decision made apart. The most painful confrontation came unexpectedly. During what was supposed to be a brief check-in, Rasheeda asked Kirk a simple question, whether he still believed in what they'd built together. The pause that followed said more than any argument ever had. Kirk admitted that he believed in the foundation, but not in the way things were being handled now. Rasheeda's eyes filled with tears as she asked when he stopped believing in her. Emotions ran high as Kirk said it wasn't about belief, it was about trust, and that trust had been shaken too many times. That admission hit harder than any accusation. Rasheeda accused him of moving the goalposts, of holding her to standards he never clearly communicated. Kirk countered that leadership meant knowing when to slow down, when to listen. Fans are shocked hearing how both felt misunderstood, trapped in narratives they didn't recognize themselves in. The family was left divided as even neutral parties struggled to see a path forward. As pressure mounted, Rasheeda made another decisive move, reaching out directly to concerned partners to reassure them. She framed it as damage control, but Kirk saw it as another example of acting first and discussing later. When he confronted her, his voice was calm but distant, which somehow hurt more than yelling. Emotions ran high as he said this was why he felt pushed out, always reacting instead of collaborating. Rasheeda snapped that collaboration required participation, not silence. That exchange marked a shift. Kirk stopped arguing. Instead, he started disengaging. Messages went unanswered. Meetings were delegated. Fans are shocked noticing how absent he seemed, like he'd already emotionally stepped away. Rasheeda felt the change immediately, describing it to a friend as losing a partner without getting closure. The family was left divided as some encouraged her to keep pushing forward, while others warned her to prepare for the worst. The final straw came during a tense call meant to settle next steps. Rasheeda asked directly if Kirk planned to stay involved. He took a deep breath and said he couldn't commit to that anymore. Emotions ran high as he explained that continuing felt dishonest to himself and damaging to the business. Rasheeda's voice trembled as she accused him of quitting when things got hard. Kirk replied that sometimes stepping away was the responsible choice. That conversation ended without resolution, but with a sense of finality neither could ignore. Rasheeda sat in silence afterward, realizing the fight was no longer about winning an argument. It was about survival, personally and professionally. Kirk, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of relief and guilt, knowing his decision would change everything. Fans are shocked as insiders hint that announcements are imminent, and the family was left divided, bracing for the fallout. As the dust hovered but refused to settle, one thing became clear. The crisis had transformed them. Trust had been replaced by caution, unity by strategy. Whatever came next would define not just their business, but their legacy. And with emotions still raw and answers still unclear, the story was far from over. The tension didn't explode right away after that last call, and in some ways that made it worse. Everything slowed down, like the calm before something irreversible. Rasheeda moved through her days on autopilot, smiling when she needed to, speaking with confidence she barely felt, and carrying a weight no one could see. Kirk stayed distant, communicating only through intermediaries, his presence fading from spaces he once dominated. Fans are shocked watching the quiet shift, sensing that something final was approaching even without a formal announcement. Behind the scenes, preparations were happening on both sides. Rasheeda worked late nights with her team, tightening operations, cutting unnecessary risks, and reshaping the narrative wherever she could. She wanted to prove, if only to herself, that she didn't need Kirk's shadow to survive. Kirk, meanwhile, focused on clean exits, ensuring that whatever separation came next would leave him protected. Emotions ran high among those closest to them, many feeling forced to choose loyalty when all they wanted was peace. The first public sign came subtly. A scheduled appearance was cancelled with no explanation. Then another. Fans are shocked as speculation filled the gaps, every silence analyzed, every move dissected. Rasheeda felt the scrutiny intensely, knowing that every decision she made would be used as evidence either for or against her. Kirk remained silent, which only fueled rumors that he was already gone in everything but name. The next confrontation happened unexpectedly when they crossed paths at a mutual obligation neither could avoid. The room went quiet the moment they saw each other. Rasheeda held herself steady, refusing to look away. Kirk nodded, polite but distant. The exchange lasted seconds, but it confirmed what everyone feared. The connection was gone. Emotions ran high among onlookers who sensed they were witnessing the end of an era in real time. Later that night, Rasheeda confronted him one last time, not with anger, but with exhaustion. She asked him if this was really how he wanted things to end, through silence and distance. Kirk listened, shoulders heavy, and admitted that he didn't know another way anymore. He said every conversation turned into a battle, every compromise felt like surrender. Rasheeda replied that walking away without trying was its own kind of betrayal. Fans would later be shocked hearing that this conversation, the calmest of them all, hurt the most. Kirk finally said what he'd been circling around for weeks. He said he was done as a business partner. Not temporarily, not conditionally, but fully. Emotions ran high as the words settled between them. Rasheeda felt her chest tighten, the finality cutting deeper than any accusation. She asked him if he understood what that meant, not just for contracts and companies, but for everything they'd built together. Kirk said he did, and that understanding was exactly why he couldn't keep pretending. The aftermath was swift. Paperwork followed, meetings were cancelled, and plans were redrawn without both names at the table. Fans are shocked at how quickly the split became real. Rasheeda found herself answering questions she never thought she'd face, defending decisions she once proudly shared. Kirk retreated further, letting representatives speak for him, reinforcing the distance he believed was necessary. The family was left divided in ways that felt permanent. Some rallied around Rasheeda, praising her resilience and refusal to back down. Others quietly supported Kirk, saying he'd done what he had to do to protect himself. Gatherings became smaller, conversations guarded. Emotions ran high as people realized there was no neutral ground left. Rasheeda struggled privately with moments of doubt. Late at night, she questioned whether she could have handled things differently, whether slowing down might have changed the outcome. But every time she revisited the past, she came back to the same truth. She had acted with intention, even if the results were messy. Kirk, too, had his moments of regret, wondering if walking away would haunt him more than staying ever did. Fans are shocked knowing that both were hurting, even as they stood on opposite sides. The public narrative continued to shift. Some framed Kirk as the one who drew necessary boundaries. Others saw Rasheeda as the one unfairly blamed for ambition. Emotions ran high online, with debates raging and loyalty tested. Neither responded directly, choosing instead to let the story unfold without commentary. The silence spoke volumes. As weeks passed, the business began to stabilize in its new form. Rasheeda proved she could lead, making tough calls and earning back confidence piece by piece. Kirk settled into his separate path, quieter but controlled. The family was left divided, but life moved forward, reshaped by choices that couldn't be undone. Yet despite the progress, there was no real closure. The last words Kirk had said still echoed, and Rasheeda knew some wounds don't heal just because time passes. Fans are shocked realizing that this wasn't just a breakup of a partnership, but the loss of a shared dream. Emotions ran high as everyone involved came to terms with a future that looked nothing like the past. By the time whispers of official statements began circulating, the damage had already been done. Whatever was announced would only confirm what everyone already felt. Kirk had drawn his line. Rasheeda had accepted the challenge. The family was left divided, the fans left debating, and the story left unfinished, hanging in that uncomfortable space where endings blur into beginnings. The official announcement finally came, but by then it felt more like confirmation than surprise. A carefully worded statement circulated, vague enough to avoid blame yet heavy with implication. It spoke of strategic realignment and mutual respect, but fans are shocked because everyone could read between the lines. The partnership was over. Rasheeda read the statement twice before putting her phone down, feeling both relieved and hollow. Kirk approved it without comment, believing distance was still the safest choice. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Supporters flooded Rasheeda with messages praising her strength and resilience. Critics resurfaced old doubts, questioning whether this crisis could have been avoided. Emotions ran high as Rasheeda tried to focus on the present instead of defending the past. She reminded herself that survival wasn't about winning public opinion, it was about moving forward. Kirk watched the response from a distance, telling himself that silence was still the right move, even as guilt crept in. Behind closed doors, the real work began. Rasheeda threw herself into rebuilding, determined not to let the split define her. She made bold hires, cut underperforming projects, and leaned into transparency with her team. Slowly, confidence returned. Fans are shocked seeing her regain momentum, proving she wasn't just reacting to crisis but shaping a future on her own terms. Every small win felt like a quiet rebuttal to doubt. Kirk's transition was quieter but no less intense. Stepping away didn't bring the instant peace he expected. Instead, it forced him to confront how much of his identity had been tied to the partnership. He focused on advisory roles and selective projects, telling himself this was freedom. Yet late at night, questions lingered. Had he protected himself, or had he walked away from something irreplaceable? Emotions ran high in moments of reflection he never shared publicly. The family continued to feel the ripple effects. Relationships adjusted, some strengthening, others fading. Gatherings remained cautious, marked by unspoken rules about what not to mention. The family was left divided, not by hostility, but by unresolved loyalty. Rasheeda noticed who showed up consistently, who checked in quietly, and who disappeared. Kirk did the same, each interpreting absence in their own way. Time passed, and with it came a fragile sense of normalcy. The business stabilized, new routines formed. Fans are shocked at how quickly life seemed to move on, even though the emotional weight remained. Rasheeda found pride in what she'd built independently, a confidence rooted in experience rather than validation. Kirk found satisfaction in clarity, even if it came at a cost. Yet despite outward progress, neither fully escaped the shadow of what they'd lost. Shared memories surfaced unexpectedly, reminders of a time when decisions were made together, when trust felt automatic. Emotions ran high in those moments, nostalgia mixing with regret. Rasheeda sometimes wondered if they'd ever truly listened to each other. Kirk wondered if fear had driven him more than reason. The public continued to speculate, searching for villains and heroes. Rasheeda resisted the urge to correct the narrative, choosing instead to let her work speak. Kirk maintained his distance, believing engagement would only reopen wounds. Fans are shocked by the restraint on both sides, accustomed to louder reactions. The silence, however, only added to the mystique of what really happened. As months went by, whispers of possible reconciliation surfaced, quickly dismissed by those closest to them. Not because reconciliation was impossible, but because the cost felt too high. Both had changed, both had hardened in certain ways. The family was left divided not just by sides, but by acceptance that some chapters don't get rewritten. In rare moments of honesty, Rasheeda admitted she missed the partnership, not the conflict. Kirk admitted he missed the certainty, not the tension. Emotions ran high when they acknowledged these truths privately, even if never to each other. Growth had come, but so had distance. The story didn't end with closure, only with continuation. Rasheeda moved forward, carrying lessons etched by struggle. Kirk moved on, guided by caution earned through loss. Fans are shocked realizing that sometimes the most dramatic endings aren't explosive, but quiet, unfolding over time. What remained was a legacy reshaped, not erased. A partnership that once symbolized unity now stood as a reminder of how ambition, fear, and pride can collide. The family was left divided, the audience left debating, and both individuals left navigating futures forged by choices they couldn't undo. The chapter had closed, but the echoes of it would linger, reminding everyone that some decisions change everything, even when they feel necessary in the moment. Even after the announcement settled, the emotional aftershocks kept rolling in. It wasn't the loud kind of chaos anymore, but the quiet kind that creeps into moments you don't expect. Rasheeda would be in the middle of a productive day when a memory hit her out of nowhere, a time when Kirk had backed her idea without hesitation, when partnership felt effortless. Those moments didn't weaken her resolve, but they did remind her of what had been lost. Fans are shocked when insiders say she never spoke badly about him in private, choosing instead to focus on what was ahead. Kirk's experience wasn't much easier. Distancing himself from the business didn't erase the emotional investment he'd poured into it for years. He'd sit in meetings about new ventures and catch himself comparing everything to what he once had. The clarity he thought he'd gain from stepping away came with its own confusion. Emotions ran high when he admitted to a confidant that walking away hadn't brought the peace he imagined, only a different kind of pressure. Publicly, both appeared composed, even strong. Privately, the processing continued. Rasheeda faced moments where doubt tried to creep back in, especially when challenges arose that she once would have tackled with Kirk by her side. But each time she pushed through alone, her confidence deepened. The family was left divided, but her inner circle grew tighter, bound by loyalty forged in crisis. Kirk's circle shifted too. Some relationships faded without the shared business as a connector. Others strengthened, rooted in understanding rather than strategy. He began to see how much the partnership had shaped his identity, how intertwined his sense of purpose had been with theirs. Fans are shocked hearing that he once questioned whether he'd defined himself too narrowly, whether walking away was as much about self-discovery as self-protection. The media cycle moved on, but the story lingered. Occasional questions surfaced in interviews, carefully deflected or answered in broad strokes. Rasheeda spoke about growth, resilience, and learning to trust herself. Kirk spoke about boundaries, reflection, and the importance of alignment. Emotions ran high behind those polished responses, even if the public never saw it. As time went on, subtle shifts happened. Rasheeda began collaborating with new voices, bringing fresh energy into her world. The excitement reminded her why she took risks in the first place. Fans are shocked at how quickly she adapted, turning what many thought would break her into fuel. Each success felt earned, unshared, but deeply satisfying. Kirk found himself drawn to quieter projects, ones that didn't demand constant defense or explanation. He enjoyed the simplicity, the sense of control. Yet occasionally, he missed the scale, the ambition, the feeling of building something massive with someone who understood the vision from the inside. The family was left divided, but distance gave him space to acknowledge feelings he once buried under responsibility. There were moments when their paths nearly crossed again, industry events, mutual connections, shared history hovering just beneath the surface. When it happened, the interactions were polite, restrained, almost fragile. Fans are shocked at how civil it all seemed, unaware of the emotional weight beneath those brief exchanges. Neither pushed, neither retreated, both respecting the invisible boundary that now existed. In private reflection, Rasheeda recognized that the crisis had forced her to step fully into herself. No safety net, no shared blame, no shared credit. It was terrifying, but also empowering. She no longer questioned whether she belonged at the table. She built her own. Emotions ran high when she realized that the very thing Kirk feared had become her proving ground. Kirk, too, evolved. Stepping back taught him the cost of constant vigilance, the toll of always preparing for worst-case scenarios. He began to understand that control and trust don't always coexist easily. Fans are shocked when sources say he expressed admiration for how Rasheeda handled the aftermath, even if he never said it publicly. Respect hadn't vanished, it had simply changed form. The family dynamic slowly found a new rhythm. Not healed, not whole, but functional. Some wounds remained tender, some conversations permanently avoided. The family was left divided, yet life demanded adaptation. Birthdays, milestones, obligations continued, shaped by new unspoken rules. As the months turned into a year, the crisis transformed from an open wound into a scar. Visible, permanent, but no longer bleeding. Rasheeda carried it as proof of survival. Kirk carried it as a lesson. Fans are shocked realizing that the biggest drama wasn't the split itself, but what followed, the quiet rebuilding, the personal reckonings, the growth born from conflict. In the end, there was no dramatic reconciliation, no explosive final showdown. Just two people moving forward on separate paths, shaped by a shared past they could neither erase nor relive. Emotions ran high in the realization that sometimes the most powerful stories don't end with resolution, but with acceptance. The business crisis that once threatened to destroy everything instead reshaped it. Not into what it was before, but into something new, something harder, something honest. The family was left divided, the fans left debating, and both Kirk and Rasheeda left standing, changed forever by the moment everything fell apart. Even with time creating distance, the impact of the split never truly faded. It lingered in the background of every success and every setback, a quiet reminder of how fragile partnerships could be when pressure hit. Rasheeda learned to sit with that reality instead of fighting it. She stopped asking herself what could have been done differently and started focusing on what could still be built. Fans are shocked when insiders say this shift didn't come from bitterness, but from exhaustion. She was tired of reliving the same questions and ready to move forward without apology. Kirk's journey took a more internal turn. Without the constant demands of the business, he had space to think in ways he never had before. That space wasn't always comfortable. He revisited moments from the crisis, replaying conversations in his head, wondering if there had been another path he hadn't seen at the time. Emotions ran high in those reflections, especially when he realized how much fear had driven his decisions. Fear of loss, fear of being blamed, fear of being tied to something he couldn't control. The public, however, wanted more. Fans are shocked that even months later, questions still followed both of them. People wanted clarity, accountability, a clean ending they could understand. Neither provided it. Rasheeda stayed focused on her work, letting results speak louder than explanations. Kirk remained reserved, choosing discretion over defense. The silence frustrated some, but it also protected what little peace they had managed to reclaim. As Rasheeda's projects gained traction, the narrative began to shift. What once was framed as a fall became a comeback. Supporters praised her resilience, pointing to the way she navigated chaos without losing her sense of self. Emotions ran high when she spoke privately about how close she'd come to walking away altogether. She admitted that there were moments when the weight felt unbearable, when proving herself seemed pointless. What kept her going, she said, was the refusal to let someone else's fear define her limits. Kirk watched these developments from a distance, conflicted. Part of him felt validated, believing that stepping away had allowed her to thrive without the friction they once shared. Another part of him felt a quiet sting, wondering if his presence had been more of a hindrance than he'd ever realized. Fans are shocked hearing that he never took credit for the separation, nor did he regret it openly. His feelings were layered, complicated, and largely private. Their shared history continued to influence how others interacted with them. Collaborators asked careful questions, tiptoeing around the past. Family members learned which topics were off limits. The family was left divided not by open conflict, but by unspoken boundaries everyone respected. Emotions ran high beneath that surface calm, but life moved forward anyway, demanding adaptation. Rasheeda eventually reached a point where she no longer introduced herself through the lens of the split. It stopped being the headline of her story and became just one chapter. Fans are shocked at how liberating that felt for her. She spoke about growth with a clarity that only comes from surviving something deeply personal and public at the same time. She no longer needed validation from those who doubted her during the crisis. Kirk, too, evolved in quieter ways. He became more selective, more intentional. Stepping back taught him the cost of constant defense and the value of alignment. Emotions ran high when he admitted to someone close that he'd learned more from the fallout than from years of success. The crisis had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd long ignored, and while that confrontation was painful, it was also grounding. There were still moments of tension, small reminders that not everything had healed. A comment taken the wrong way, a rumor resurfacing unexpectedly, a memory triggered by a familiar place. Fans are shocked that despite all the progress, those moments could still sting. But they no longer controlled the narrative. Both had learned how to acknowledge the past without living in it. As new opportunities emerged, comparisons were inevitable. People measured current successes against what once was. Rasheeda stopped engaging with those comparisons altogether. She believed growth wasn't linear and success didn't need a mirror. Kirk adopted a similar mindset, focusing on fulfillment rather than scale. The family was left divided in perspective, but united in the understanding that life had changed permanently. With time, the emotional charge of the crisis softened. What once felt raw became reflective. Rasheeda could speak about the experience without anger. Kirk could think about it without defensiveness. Fans are shocked realizing that healing didn't come from reconciliation, but from acceptance. They didn't need to agree on the past to move forward separately. The story continued, not with dramatic twists, but with steady progression. Rasheeda built, learned, adjusted. Kirk refined, observed, recalibrated. The family was left divided, yet functional. The audience remained curious, always searching for meaning in the fallout. In the end, the crisis stood as a turning point rather than a conclusion. It reshaped identities, redefined priorities, and exposed truths neither could ignore. Emotions ran high during the unraveling, but clarity emerged in the aftermath. Both survived, not unchanged, but stronger in ways they hadn't anticipated. And as the world kept watching, debating, and speculating, Rasheeda and Kirk continued forward on separate paths, carrying the lessons of what they'd built and what they'd lost. The drama faded into history, but its impact remained, woven into who they had become, a reminder that some partnerships end not because of failure, but because growth demands a different direction. As the story stretched further into the future, the weight of what happened began to settle into something quieter but no less powerful. The chaos that once defined their days was replaced by routine, and that routine carried its own kind of truth. Rasheeda learned that peace didn't mean everything was fixed, it meant she no longer woke up bracing for impact. The crisis had forced her to grow faster than she ever planned, and now that growth felt permanent. Fans are shocked when people close to her say she no longer second-guessed herself the way she once did. Kirk's life settled into a rhythm too, one built around intention instead of reaction. Without the constant pressure of shared decision-making, he found clarity in choosing when and how to engage. But clarity didn't erase memory. There were still moments when something small, a phrase, a familiar setting, pulled him back into the past. Emotions ran high in those flashes, not with anger, but with a strange sense of mourning for something that no longer existed. The world around them continued to move, indifferent to personal loss. Opportunities came and went. Challenges arose that had nothing to do with the old crisis. Rasheeda handled them with a steadiness that surprised even her. The family was left divided, but respect began to replace judgment. Some who once doubted her admitted, quietly, that she had proven herself. That acknowledgement mattered more than any public praise. Kirk watched these shifts with mixed feelings. He felt relief knowing the business hadn't collapsed without him. At the same time, it forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. Walking away hadn't destroyed everything the way he once feared. Fans are shocked when insiders suggest this realization was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it meant he hadn't caused irreparable harm, unsettling because it challenged how essential he believed his role had been. Time softened the sharpest edges of the conflict. The arguments faded into memory, replaced by lessons that lingered. Rasheeda began mentoring others, sharing what she'd learned about leadership under pressure. She spoke about trusting instinct, but also about the cost of carrying everything alone. Emotions ran high when she admitted that strength sometimes looks like asking for support sooner, not later. Kirk found himself drawn into conversations about boundaries and balance. He spoke about the importance of alignment, of knowing when to step forward and when to step back. Fans are shocked at how reflective he became, a contrast to the defensiveness people once saw. The crisis had stripped away certainty and replaced it with awareness, and that awareness shaped every choice he made afterward. The family dynamic continued to evolve. Some relationships healed, others remained distant but civil. The family was left divided, yet the tension no longer dominated every interaction. Time taught them how to exist in the same space without reopening old wounds. Birthdays, celebrations, and milestones carried a new normal, one built on caution but also acceptance. Occasionally, the past resurfaced publicly. An old clip would circulate, a comment taken out of context would spark speculation. Fans are shocked at how quickly old narratives tried to reassert themselves. But Rasheeda no longer felt compelled to respond. She understood now that not every story needed correction. Kirk felt the same, choosing silence not as avoidance but as preservation. As years passed, the crisis became part of their mythology rather than their identity. It was referenced, debated, analyzed, but it no longer defined who they were. Rasheeda measured success differently now, not by scale alone, but by sustainability and peace. Kirk measured it by alignment and control over his time. Both definitions were shaped by what they'd been through. There were moments of unexpected gratitude. Rasheeda acknowledged that the split forced her to step fully into herself. Kirk acknowledged that walking away taught him limits he'd never respected before. Emotions ran high in those realizations, not because of regret, but because of clarity. Sometimes growth only reveals itself after loss. The audience never fully let go of the story. Fans are shocked that even long after, people still searched for hidden meanings, secret reconciliations, or final answers. But the truth was simpler and more complex at the same time. There was no single villain, no single mistake. Just two people reacting differently to pressure, fear, and ambition. The business crisis that once threatened to consume everything eventually faded into context. It became a reference point, a before and after marker in both their lives. Rasheeda stood on the after side with confidence hard-earned. Kirk stood there with caution earned just as deeply. The family was left divided but not destroyed. In quiet moments, both reflected on what partnership really meant. Not just shared goals, but shared tolerance for risk, shared communication, shared trust. Fans are shocked at how often those reflections led back to the same conclusion. Love and loyalty don't always translate cleanly into business alignment. As time continued its steady march, new chapters unfolded. Rasheeda expanded her vision, taking risks again, but this time on her own terms. Kirk chose projects that felt manageable, intentional, aligned with who he had become. Neither path was better or worse, just different. The echoes of the past remained, but they no longer dictated the future. Emotions ran high in remembering, but not in reliving. Both had learned how to carry the story without letting it weigh them down. That, in itself, was a victory. The family found a fragile equilibrium. Divided in opinion, united in moving forward. Fans continued to debate, to analyze, to choose sides. But the people at the center of the story had moved on from needing that validation. In the end, the crisis did what it was always going to do. It revealed truths that comfort never could. It stripped away illusions and forced growth through discomfort. Rasheeda emerged more certain of herself. Kirk emerged more aware of his limits. The family was left divided, but stronger in understanding. And as the story faded further into the past, it became clear that the real drama wasn't the accusations or the split. It was the transformation that followed. Two people, once bound by partnership, now walking separate paths shaped by the same storm. Not enemies, not allies, just survivors of a moment that changed everything. As the years kept moving forward, the echoes of that moment never fully disappeared, but they changed in tone. What once felt like noise slowly became perspective. Rasheeda no longer viewed the crisis as something that happened to her, but something that shaped her. The fear she once felt when standing alone had transformed into confidence built on experience. Fans are shocked when those close to her say she actually credits that period for sharpening her instincts and strengthening her voice. Kirk's evolution followed a different rhythm. Distance gave him clarity, but also accountability. With fewer distractions, he had to sit with his choices and their consequences. He didn't regret protecting himself, but he did acknowledge that fear had influenced his timing and his tone. Emotions ran high in moments of self-awareness, especially when he realized how quickly defensive instincts can close doors that patience might have kept open. The world around them kept changing, and new challenges emerged that had nothing to do with the past. Rasheeda navigated them with a calm authority that hadn't existed before. She trusted her judgment without needing consensus, and when mistakes happened, she owned them without spiraling. The family was left divided, but even skeptics couldn't deny the growth they witnessed. Kirk found comfort in operating behind the scenes. He became more deliberate, more selective about where he invested his energy. Fans are shocked hearing that he turned down opportunities that once would have excited him, choosing instead to protect his peace. Success, to him, no longer meant expansion at all costs, but sustainability without constant tension. Occasionally, the past resurfaced in unexpected ways. An interview question, a throwback clip, a comment that reopened old debates. Emotions ran high for fans who never stopped searching for a clear villain or a dramatic reunion. But Rasheeda and Kirk remained consistent in their restraint. Neither rewrote history publicly, neither weaponized the past. That silence frustrated some, but it also kept the wounds from reopening. The family dynamic continued to evolve in subtle ways. Over time, sides softened. Conversations became easier. Not healed, but manageable. The family was left divided in memory, not in daily life. Shared spaces grew less tense as acceptance replaced expectation. People stopped waiting for reconciliation and started respecting boundaries. Rasheeda reached a point where she could talk about the crisis without her chest tightening. She framed it as a turning point, not a tragedy. Fans are shocked when she described it as painful but necessary, saying comfort can hide problems until they explode. That honesty resonated with people who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. Kirk, in quieter moments, acknowledged that the split forced him to grow emotionally in ways he hadn't expected. Stepping away from constant control revealed how much pressure he'd normalized. Emotions ran high when he admitted that he'd learned the difference between protecting himself and shutting people out. The line, he realized, was thinner than he once believed. As time went on, comparisons to the past lost their power. Rasheeda's success stood on its own. Kirk's choices made sense in the context of his values. Fans are shocked realizing that the story didn't need a dramatic ending to feel complete. Life kept going, and that continuation was the resolution. The business world moved on too. New names, new power dynamics, new stories replaced the old headlines. The crisis became a reference point rather than a focus. Rasheeda saw it as proof of resilience. Kirk saw it as proof of limits. Both interpretations were valid, shaped by their roles in the fallout. There were moments of quiet gratitude on both sides. Gratitude for lessons learned the hard way. Gratitude for clarity gained through loss. Emotions ran high not with sadness but with respect for what they survived. The storm had passed, leaving behind different landscapes, but neither stood in ruins. Fans continued to debate long after the principals stopped engaging. Theories persisted, blame shifted, but the truth remained layered and unresolved, just like most real-life conflicts. The family was left divided in perspective, but united in moving forward without reopening old wounds. In the end, the crisis did more than end a partnership. It revealed how two people respond differently to pressure, fear, and uncertainty. Rasheeda leaned into action. Kirk leaned into protection. Neither approach was perfect, but both were human. The real story wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about how quickly success can strain trust, how silence can become distance, and how growth often comes from moments we wish we could undo. Fans are shocked when they realize the biggest takeaway wasn't the drama, but the transformation. Rasheeda emerged with a stronger sense of self, unafraid to lead alone. Kirk emerged with a clearer understanding of his boundaries and limits. The family was left divided, but wiser for what they witnessed. And as the chapter continued to fade into history, one truth remained undeniable. The crisis changed everything, not by destroying what came before, but by forcing both of them to become who they needed to be next. Even as time stretched on, the story refused to fully settle into the past. It lived in undertones, in how people spoke around them, in how decisions were made with extra caution. Rasheeda understood now that some chapters never truly close, they just stopped being the main plot. She carried the experience with a steadiness that surprised even her, no longer reacting to echoes, no longer flinching at reminders. Fans are shocked when those close to her say she stopped seeing the split as a wound and started seeing it as proof that she could survive disruption. Kirk's relationship with the past evolved more slowly. He wasn't haunted, but he wasn't untouched either. There were moments when he wondered whether timing had been his greatest enemy, whether speaking sooner or softer might have shifted the outcome. Emotions ran high in those reflections, not because he wanted to go back, but because he understood how quickly certainty can turn into rigidity. Stepping away had protected him, but it had also forced him to live with unanswered questions. The public had mostly moved on, but the curiosity never fully disappeared. Fans are shocked how often new listeners or viewers would stumble upon the story and reignite old debates. Rasheeda no longer felt defensive when it happened. She accepted that people project their own fears and experiences onto public narratives. Kirk felt the same, choosing not to correct assumptions unless they directly affected his present. Both learned that silence, when chosen intentionally, could be power rather than avoidance. Rasheeda's leadership style continued to mature. She delegated more, trusted her team deeply, and refused to carry everything alone the way she once had. The crisis had taught her that independence didn't mean isolation. Emotions ran high when she admitted to someone close that she'd confused strength with endurance for too long. Learning to share the weight didn't make her weaker, it made her sustainable. Kirk found value in simplicity. Fewer moving parts meant fewer compromises. He focused on projects that aligned with his pace, his energy, his tolerance for risk. Fans are shocked hearing that he intentionally chose smaller wins over larger exposure, prioritizing control over scale. The crisis had rewired his definition of success, and he wasn't interested in unlearning that lesson. The family dynamic, once strained to the point of silence, slowly found its footing. Not everyone agreed on what happened or why, but agreement was no longer required for coexistence. The family was left divided in interpretation, but not in humanity. Shared moments returned, guarded at first, then easier with time. No one forced closure. They let comfort arrive naturally. Rasheeda noticed that people began coming to her for advice, especially those navigating partnership conflicts of their own. She didn't give simple answers. Instead, she spoke about alignment, communication, and the danger of assuming shared vision without constant conversation. Fans are shocked at how openly she discussed the emotional toll, refusing to glamorize the struggle. She made it clear that ambition without understanding can fracture even the strongest bonds. Kirk, too, became a quiet sounding board for others. He spoke about boundaries, about listening to discomfort before it turns into resentment. Emotions ran high when he admitted that ignoring his instincts for too long had made the eventual break more painful than it needed to be. He didn't frame himself as a victim or a villain, just as someone who learned late but learned deeply. As the years passed, the intensity of the original crisis softened into context. It was no longer the defining moment of their public identities, but it remained a defining moment internally. Rasheeda recognized that without that rupture, she might never have stepped fully into her authority. Kirk recognized that without that rupture, he might never have confronted his limits. Fans are shocked when they realize that both had gained something essential through loss. There were occasional moments of shared space, unavoidable intersections where history hovered between them. The interactions were brief, respectful, and neutral. No warmth, no hostility, just acknowledgement. The absence of drama spoke louder than any argument ever had. Emotions ran high in the simplicity of those moments because they confirmed that the story had truly changed shape. Rasheeda stopped wondering if reconciliation was possible and started asking whether it was necessary. The answer, she realized, was no. Peace didn't require reunion. Kirk came to a similar conclusion, understanding that some connections serve a purpose for a season and then release you. The family was left divided in memory, but united in acceptance that not all endings need repair. Fans continued to debate, to assign blame, to search for hidden truths. But the people living the story no longer felt the need to participate. The narrative belonged to the past. The present demanded attention, intention, and care. Rasheeda poured herself into building something lasting. Kirk poured himself into maintaining balance. Both were valid responses to the same storm. With distance, the crisis revealed its real lesson. Success doesn't fail loudly at first. It fails quietly, through missed conversations, ignored discomfort, and unspoken fears. Emotions ran high in that realization, because it meant the warning signs had been there all along. Both had seen them. Both had responded differently. As time continued its steady march, the echoes grew softer. The story became one of transformation rather than fracture. Rasheeda stood firmly in her independence, no longer measuring herself against what was lost. Kirk stood firmly in his boundaries, no longer apologizing for choosing peace. The family was left divided, but grounded in reality rather than resentment. In the end, the crisis wasn't remembered for the accusations or the split. It was remembered for what followed. Growth that couldn't be undone. Clarity that couldn't be ignored. Two people shaped by the same moment, walking different paths with intention. And as the chapter finally settled into history, one truth stood clear above all else. The partnership ended, but the lesson endured. Pressure reveals truth. Silence amplifies distance. And sometimes, walking away is not the failure everyone expects, but the beginning of becoming who you were meant to be all along. As the years continued to pass, the story became less about what was said and more about what was learned. Rasheeda no longer measured moments against the past, because the past had finally stopped chasing her. She had reached a place where confidence didn't need to announce itself. It showed in how she moved, how she decided, how she handled pressure without panic. Fans are shocked when people close to her say she rarely even mentioned the split anymore unless asked directly. It wasn't avoidance. It was closure on her own terms. Kirk's journey remained quieter, but no less meaningful. He had learned to sit with discomfort instead of reacting to it. The instinct to pull away at the first sign of conflict had softened into something more thoughtful. Emotions ran high when he admitted privately that he'd learned too late that protection without communication can feel like abandonment to the other person. It wasn't an apology aimed outward. It was an understanding aimed inward. The world around them shifted again and again, as it always does. New stories captured attention. New dramas replaced old ones. Fans are shocked at how quickly yesterday's scandal becomes background noise. But for Rasheeda and Kirk, the experience remained personal, not because it still hurt, but because it had changed the way they viewed partnership, trust, and power. Rasheeda's leadership became more collaborative, but also more decisive. She no longer waited for validation before acting, yet she made space for dissent in ways she hadn't before. The crisis taught her that being strong didn't mean being unchallenged. It meant being willing to listen without losing direction. Emotions ran high when she spoke about this shift, admitting that she once saw resistance as disloyalty, not perspective. Kirk found himself more patient than he used to be. Where he once rushed to set boundaries, he now took time to understand where discomfort was coming from. Fans are shocked hearing that he described the split as the moment he realized fear can masquerade as logic. That realization didn't make him reckless. It made him slower, more intentional, less reactive. The family dynamic continued to normalize in its own imperfect way. There was no grand healing moment, no emotional reunion. Instead, there was acceptance. People stopped asking what went wrong and started focusing on what was working now. The family was left divided in opinion, but united in the understanding that peace didn't require agreement, only respect. Rasheeda noticed how often people projected their own relationship struggles onto her story. Fans are shocked when she said she recognized herself in those questions years earlier. She responded with honesty, saying partnerships don't fail overnight. They erode quietly when communication stops feeling safe. Emotions ran high when she emphasized that silence is rarely neutral. It always says something, even when nothing is spoken. Kirk echoed similar sentiments in his own way. He spoke about the danger of waiting too long to address discomfort. He admitted that avoiding conflict doesn't prevent fallout, it delays it. Fans are shocked by how reflective he became, openly acknowledging that his desire for control sometimes came from fear of chaos, not strategy. The past no longer felt like a shadow, but like a reference point. Rasheeda could look back without flinching. Kirk could reflect without defensiveness. That shift alone marked how far both had come. Emotions ran high not because the memory was painful, but because the growth was undeniable. There were still moments of speculation, especially when old footage resurfaced or rumors tried to link their names again. Fans are shocked at how quickly narratives attempt to rewrite themselves. But neither engaged. They understood now that not every story needs a response. Some stories lose power when left alone. Rasheeda's confidence inspired others to step into uncertainty without apology. She became a symbol of resilience not because she avoided conflict, but because she survived it without losing herself. Kirk became an example of recalibration, of stepping back before damage becomes irreversible. The family was left divided in interpretation, but the lessons reached far beyond them. As time continued to move, the crisis became less about blame and more about awareness. Awareness of how ambition can collide with fear. Awareness of how silence can be louder than argument. Awareness of how partnerships require constant tending, not assumptions. Emotions ran high in recognizing that none of this was unique, it was simply human. Rasheeda stopped defining success by permanence. She understood now that some things are meant to last forever, and others are meant to teach you something before ending. That understanding freed her from bitterness. Kirk reached a similar place, recognizing that walking away didn't erase contribution. It simply marked the end of a chapter. The family found balance in the new normal. Not perfect, not whole, but functional. Shared spaces no longer felt heavy. The past was acknowledged, not ignored, but it no longer dictated behavior. Fans are shocked at how ordinary things eventually became, how drama fades when people choose peace over performance. In the end, the story didn't conclude with triumph or tragedy. It concluded with transformation. Rasheeda became more herself than she'd ever been. Kirk became more aware than he'd ever allowed himself to be. The family was left divided, but wiser. The audience was left debating, but the people living the story had moved on. The crisis that once threatened to break everything instead revealed what mattered most. Communication, alignment, courage, not the loud kind, but the quiet courage to make hard decisions and live with them honestly. And as the echoes finally softened into memory, one truth remained. The partnership ended, but the growth didn't. What was built after the fallout mattered just as much as what came before it. And sometimes, the most dramatic stories don't end with reconciliation or revenge, but with acceptance, clarity, and the strength to keep moving forward. If you've made it this far, then you already know this story isn't just about business, money, or headlines. It's about pressure, trust, and the moments that change everything. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and the family was left divided, but now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you think Kirk was right to draw the line when he did, or do you believe Rasheeda was unfairly blamed for a crisis that went deeper than one decision? There are no easy answers here, and that's exactly why this story hits so hard. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us whose side you're on, or if you think both played a role in how things fell apart. Do you believe partnerships should survive storms at all costs, or is walking away sometimes the strongest move? Your voice matters here, and this conversation doesn't end when the video does. If you want more stories like this, the kind that pull back the curtain on power, loyalty, and fallout, make sure you hit like so we know you want more deep dives. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because these stories are unfolding, and you don't want to miss what comes next. There are still unanswered questions, lingering tension, and plenty of twists ahead. And remember, behind every headline are real emotions, real consequences, and real choices. So before you scroll away, comment your take, share this video with someone who loves drama that feels real, and stay locked in right here. Because this story may be over for Kirk and Rasheeda, but the conversation is just getting started.